Thank you everyone for joining us today for our second partners, I suppose you can call it partners training during lunchtime. Lunchtime because we know we're all busy otherwise to attend. Today's session is about leadership and management, and what we thought would be a good focal point given the circumstances. I mean, what must be in all of your minds would be around managing the pandemic, as well as move into a little bit of crystal ball looking as to how we should be approaching the new normal that has happened, and will it continue to happen the rest of our practice. Joining us are two very esteemed legal practitioners. Stephen Ravel, we know him, we've seen him many times here in Malaysia, and in the conferences that we share with him. He's been with Freshfields for over 41 years. Now he has retired, but we know a person like Stephen never really retires. He's still very active in what he can share with the legal practices, and is now a consultant. And it's just appropriate that we've had the privilege and opportunity to have him join us for this session. Also, very, very esteemed Mr. Sairi from Uchon. He is honorary managing partner of Uchon and one of the founding partners of Uchon. He is, very distinguished, not only in Korea but elsewhere, and has participated in many sessions with, law firms, not just in Korea but in the rest of the world as well. We are going to, as I mentioned earlier, focus on two topics. We've had a little bit of flavor of it from the GC's point of view yesterday, right? And today we hope to focus from the law firm's management point of view. You are joining us as leaders of our network from across all 10 countries. Some of us are country managing partners. We are also practice leaders. We also, even if we are not in any of these, we are nonetheless partners and therefore lead teams. And so I hope that you will find this leadership and management focus for this session useful to you. Now, we are going to take this very easy discussion, so feel free to ask your questions. We have very experienced panelists to share with us from an outside perspective on some of the key things that we can learn from what has gone through and what is to come. So let me get into, Hanim, would you like to say a few things first before we begin?
No, please go ahead, Gilbert. This is your show.
Thank you. Okay, so now the first segment, which I hope we can focus a little bit on, is lessons learned from, for Malaysia, the last more than 100 days. We've been in lockdown as a consequence of pandemic. I would say Malaysia has been quite successful in handling the crisis. And I believe that as a law firm, not just in Malaysia, but in the rest of the network, we have done quite well in transitioning to a lockdown situation in most countries, not all, as I understand it, and responding to it. But still, we have one of our clients is Top Glove. Top Glove, as you know, is the world's largest glove manufacturer, and they're doing very well. And Tan Sri, the executive chairman, said in the press, this thing happens every 5 years. And so they, from the business point of view, it's a good business because that's what his angle was. But, it's a gentle reminder to us that while this is the, if I may say, the worst pandemic we've ever seen, we should actually expect it to happen again. And so it's important for us to look back and learn from what has happened in the last couple of months, and pick up maybe some lessons for us moving forward. So In this slide, I've also put on at the two bottom panels some of the more renowned institutions have put up in the articles as to be key to managing a crisis. I will just shift now to our panelists to ask maybe for their preliminary comments on lessons learned in the last couple of months from their perspective, whether lessons learned from within or outside of their own law firms as they observe this pandemic ravaging, generally the global situation, in particular law firms. So maybe if I may start with Stephen. Yep.
Thank you very much, Gilbert, and very good to be with you all. I think the last time I was with you all was at a great conference you had at Cherating, where I saw strong evidence of the strong culture in ZICO on many different in many different ways. So again, thank you, Gilbert and Naneem, for inviting me. A few observations. I think it's important to recognize that different law firms around the world, and I've been speaking to many, but also different practices within law firms are affected very differently. So even within your own firm, I think you need to accept that there isn't a one size fits all to the solutions and the things that you should be doing. You should be discussing what's working, you should be sharing ideas, and above all, I think as partners, you should be supporting each other. So I think there are two things that we should do all the time, but that I think are particularly important at this time for us as partners in law firms. And the first is to cross-sell, to talk to clients about their needs and to introduce other colleagues. And secondly, when we're working on a larger matter, to form what I call a full service team. So rather than thinking of a job just as a corporate job and put.
Oh, Stephen, we lost you a little bit there.
As to how the agreement might play out. There may be circumstances where you can't charge for that, but that's not necessarily the be all and end all in a difficult situation such as we find ourselves. That there may be surplus resources that you can bring together to really impress the client by putting that full service team together. So different solutions for different practices. Things that have worked during this difficult period, I'd probably pick on three things. I think working from home has largely worked across the world. I think people have embraced it and got on with it. I think one of the interesting features of work from home, as I talk to my colleagues about Freshfields, but many others, is the role which public transport plays in working from home. Generally, I think people, and particularly remember our associates, may not feel comfortable about traveling on public transport in many cities. And so finding a way around public transport to get people back in the office when that becomes appropriate may be one of our challenges as we transition from working from home to working in the office again. And I'll come on to why I think that will happen. Secondly, I think we should all be grateful. And again, this is a generalization. There are some law firms that have many challenges, but broadly, there's been a lot of work for us to do. I think in the first week of this crisis, many of us thought, there's going to be no work. Nobody will do anything. But in fact, again, as I talk to law firms across the world, the word busy is used very often. Lawyers seem to have been busy through this crisis. I think the third thing is, and again, there are differences, but I think our technology, even the basic technology that we all have as a matter of course, has largely worked and enable us to work. I think, again, one of the bits of plumbing that we'll have to revisit in the new world is actually our Wi-Fi connections. Most of the problems I've had with tech and having conversations like this has been either my own Wi-Fi or other people's Wi-Fi. And how does that get fixed to have seamless working from home? And that's kind of beyond us as individual law firms, but something we will need to address, because that's been, I think, the biggest tech issue. In terms of lessons learned, and I think we're continuing to learn those lessons and things we should do differently, even starting today. I'm worried about our associates, and I think we've maybe not paid enough attention to how stressed they are at this time. Stressed either because they're not sure they're going to have a job in the future, stressed because they're finding working from home stressful, either because they haven't got great working conditions at home, they maybe share a house and working on the kitchen table, or stressed because they're not feeling the same ability to go and walk into their partner's room to say, what do you think about this? So I think we have some stressed associates that we need to be paying more attention to be communicating with them more. And I noticed the words that McKinsey were using. I think my phrase is to be encouraging and cautiously optimistic. That's certainly where I sit at the moment, that there is room for cautious optimism. And above all, we should be encouraging to our associates. I think, again, in our different practice areas, we need to rethink how we're supervising and managing matters, so we have a good dialogue with our associates, rather than kind of leaving them to sink or swim. So more interaction with our associates. And I think so far as practice leaders are concerned, I think it's really important they find ways of being present. Not just maybe sitting in the office, but finding ways of communicating with partners and to continue to have partners meetings, but also to continue that dialogue with associates to show that leadership is present using whatever technology works. And I think my third key point is about paying attention to our clients. I think it's quite easy to sit in our work at home bubble and do the tasks that we have to do. But we need to remember, and I spoke to a GC about 2 weeks into this crisis, and the client said, I'm lonely. My lawyers are not calling me and chatting. And that was a great surprise to her. People weren't reaching out more in this time of difficulty. And clients are human. We have to keep reminding, not just clients or a matter number or an organization. They're humans, they're working from home, they've maybe got some of the same challenges that we have. So reaching out to clients, really important at the moment. Secondly, I think it's important to talk to our clients about fees and billing. None of us like to do that, but they understand we need to do it. If bills aren't being paid, we need to have a conversation. You know, is it because you don't have any cash? Is it because the accountants are working from home? How can we make sure that the essentials of business continue, but to have an open conversation with them? And maybe thirdly, when talking to them, asking about their business. They have the same nervousness as we do and many of our associates do as to what's going to happen to their businesses. What are the challenges their business is going to face? And having a good open conversation with clients show that you care about that client, but may also give rise to some opportunities, because you can introduce other colleagues or say, well, we could help with that. So having those conversations with clients, even more important. And Gilbert, you'd mentioned some of the sort of core business issues that have faced during this time in terms of, we've seen many reports of firms focusing on conserving cash, stopping paying partners, cutting bonuses, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it really is important for us as businesses to be very cautious in this current business environment. But I think if I were to pick up a theme, I think generally we've all collectively been overly cautious. And I think the time may be coming to be a little more less cautious and to start distributing cash if we have it. But above all, I think it's about communication, particularly to partners. if we're conserving cash, we need to explain why we're doing that and when it's going to change and when we're going to review it. I think we need to prioritize our associates. I think cutting associate salaries may be necessary in some firms and practices, but I think we should be cautious about doing that. We all know the phases we've been through, and I think the biggest thing I've faced in my career is a shortage of associates, and it's been a cycle, but it keeps coming, and therefore, again, staying with my theme of looking after associates. And above all, and again, I use the analogy of cost cuttings I've been through over the years, don't cut out the biscuits. You know, the little stuff, you know, biscuits with the tea in the canteen are really important. And if you cut out the biscuits, everybody thinks the firm's about to collapse because we can't even afford biscuits. So on the biscuit note, I will stop my introductory remarks.
Thank you. Stephen, I think all my partners perked up, particularly at the point when you say we should distribute the cash that we've conserved. So no, thank you for that very comprehensive, preliminary comments. I've got some questions, and already we have some that's come up. But before I do that, maybe I'll turn to Sairi to maybe share your thoughts on what can be some of the lessons learned, in Korea's experience, as well as what you may have observed outside Korea.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I'm very impressed with the ZICO's positive initiatives under the current situation. And it's very encouraging that law firms like ZICO is doing things like this. And I think that's a very good way of handling this crisis. And if I may start with the Korea situation and the Korean big law firm situation, the Korean situation has been pretty stable, as you may know, and not too bad. We have experienced no lockdown yet, and I don't think we would expect anyone to come. So in terms of controlling the situation, Korea has been quite successful. And likewise, Korean law firms, including Yulchon, have been quite stable. And we have never locked down our offices. And during the first, 1 month or so, many of our lawyers were encouraged to work from home, but most of our lawyers actually came to the office because we soon find that work from home is quite stressful, and therefore we forced our staff, secretarial and assistance staff, to work from home on a two-shift basis. So half of them were required to work from home, but that stopped about a couple of months ago. So the situation in general is quite stable. And in terms of financial position, I think most Korean law firms, including Yulchon, have been experiencing some change. Particularly, from the foreign client side, they often ask for deferral of their payment of their fees. Nevertheless, generally speaking, I understand that the financial position is pretty stable. And in fact, Yulchon raised our associate salary as usual this year in order to perhaps give a sense of security to our associates. So in terms of Korean big firms situation, we haven't experienced much difference, and therefore may have not a lot to offer to you as a lesson learned. However, I may touch on some more general issues. I think in a crisis like the COVID-19 caused, it's very important for us to understand psychology. Psychology of our staff and the client would be most important in handling and managing this crisis. So when we feel sense of crisis, we would like to depend on somebody, and in order to seek or in order to acquire the sense of security, we may be willing to trade off something that we usually would not like to. So in this situation, what is required of management, including law firms management, is strong leadership. Strong leadership would be appreciated and supported. But the time span of people's patience would be limited. In other words, in a situation of crisis, people would support strong leadership, but if things go wrong, they would not be very patient for a long time, because they realize that if we wait too long, something may go fatal. So we have to, as the leadership of the firm, have to realize that we need to exercise strong leadership, but we also have to understand that our members would not be very patient if we do not do well. And in terms of the some suggestions I may offer, some Korean companies opened quite a few offices across Seoul, tailored to their employees for work in a nearby location from home. In other words, Korean companies have realized that their employees have difficulty working from home, and also it's difficult for them to commute a long distance using public transportation, and therefore they have opened a number of smaller offices which would be dedicated to their employees who do not have to work at home, but do not have to travel a long distance. So that is quite successful in Korea. And another example, which is not necessarily I experienced in Korea, is that some US law firms provide their employees with a package of special products customized for their work from home. So some US law firms are even delivering their employees fitness equipment, which they can use for exercise at home, and also many other products which would be suitable or make their work from home convenient. So that's another specific example I can share with you, although you may be doing that already, but there are some things we can do and take advantage of this opportunity. In other words, this crisis provides some impediment to our normal work, but at the same time, it provides us a unique opportunity which is not present in other situations. So, for example, I am pushing our lawyers to propose a project to the government for a comprehensive health regulations to manage the contagion or contamination of infectious diseases, so that how we can systematically trace the move of people, and also use the IT technology without too much encroaching on privacy. So seeking a balance of public interest and personal privacy, we need to have some legislation which would justify and also effectively manage such a process. In Korea, people are very accustomed to emergency or crisis, because we are facing military threats from North Korea, and people are on constant alert. And therefore, when a different kind of crisis like this erupted, people were still very stable. This is another wave of crisis for which we are prepared. So people were following the government initiative and government regulations without complaining. Nevertheless, if this continues, or if we are expecting something similar in the future, we have to be prepared in terms of legal regulations or more systematic regulations. So this may propose an opportunity for a law firm to make an initiative and make itself known to the public, and also make contribution to the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Zairi. On this last point, we share with you what you have done. We led by Chu Seng Kok, we took the opportunity actually to submit papers to our government on two fronts. One is, of course, handling with force majeure and such, more of a contractual general scope thing. The other one is actually to deal with what we expect to be a financial crisis that will follow, right? And those shared with you were well received, and we are now part of the consultation process for some of the new legislation that the government may be looking at. One would be equivalent to a COVID-19 bill. The second is rescue financing. So thank you for sharing with that. And also this point about the pain can only be sustained for some time, right? Psychology. At some point, we need to find that release. And Stephen, you've mentioned that as well from the perspective of taking care of our associates. Now, one of the maybe before I go into that and still stay in this segment, I've got two questions already. One from Hanim and one from our Malaysia Risk and Management guy. So Hanim's question is this: what have you observed to be either personally or maybe the managing partner of Freshfields or yourself, Yuchon, what has been your hardest decision to make? Now, for Malaysia, I can tell you, and I'm sure it is for my other colleagues, country managers in the country, it's a pay cut, right? Hardest decision would have been the pay cut, whether we should do it, how much, and now the upcoming decision will be for how long. And so, like I said, a lot of my partners probably perked up, Stephen, when you say we shouldn't do this for too long. So, but then maybe we can share it. As I said, we have many different experiences. So if I may ask, what have you either personally experienced or observed as to be your hardest management decision to have been made in the context of this pandemic?
My question wasn't really on the context of pandemic. It's just generally in your career as a partner, lawyer, in your 41 careers. I think like Stephen, you opened US office and all of that for Freshfields. I'm sure that was quite interesting. Just generally in terms of leadership management, sharing.
Maybe you can take both.
Okay, I'll have a go at that. I think rather than picking out a single decision, I would say a common theme of the hardest decisions I've always had to make, both personally and as part of any leadership team, is who becomes a partner. And I think that challenge of dealing with how we promote our associates, but also in many of the situations I've been in, bringing in partners from other firms, and actually making that decision, making sure there's consensus behind that decision, and really being happy that somebody is joining the firm that will contribute to the firm. And I would say I've agonized over every vote that I've had to put my hand up for, or every situation that I've had to help manage. I think as a constant theme, that's been the hardest set of decisions I've had to make.
And in the context of the COVID-19, have you seen tough ones being made with, or has it been, for example, in Sairi's experience, which if I'm not mistaken in my impression, it's been I tell and everybody just follows?
I think probably the hardest decision that all firms are taking is exactly the point you made, Gilbert. Pay cuts, bonus cuts, stopping partner distributions. I think they're the hardest decision because, I was talking to one law firm in continental Europe, and they had made these difficult decisions around cuts, but were then having the busiest year that they've ever had. And balancing the fact that firms have been busy with being cautious about cash, I think is really hard for management because there's good reason to be cautious. But I think the element and why I picked on it is I think, particularly amongst the partner group, the leadership has got to explain why they're doing things and why that approach is right. It's a partner communication issue. And I think, generally speaking, partnerships have not been good at that. They've had a management group that have said, we need to turn the tap off and keep all the money, but they've not communicated that well with partners. I hope ZICO's different.
We've tried. Maybe I should ask my partners what they think of how we have had to make those decisions, not just for Malaysia, for also the other countries. But maybe, Sairi, do you have something to share in that regard? I'm not sure whether you've mentioned that for the Korean law firms, they've had to, implement pay cuts, and if so, how was it done, and how was it received, and maybe other ways, better ways of doing it that you may have observed in hindsight?
Well, as I said, I don't think big Korean firms, smaller firms are different. I understand that they have a lot more difficulties, but bigger firms tend to be pretty stable and have not been experiencing any big pay cuts and so on. There are exceptions, I'm pretty sure. But I think under the current situation, the most important, perhaps not necessarily the hardest, but the most important thing is, how to make people feel secure, and continue to be loyal to the firm. And at the same time, let them follow and be more diligent and alert
productive
to the situation.
Yeah. That's very interesting. I think we are on track with that, but if there are questions surrounding this that some of my partners will have, please flow through during Q&A, because I've got one more question before we move on to the next segment. This comes from our risk and IT leader from Malaysia, Tat King. Now, where he's coming from is that we've seen a spike in hacking attempts, not just for our country, but regionally. This is what our IT people who handle regional been looking at. Has this been the same that you may have observed in your countries as well? And maybe your thoughts on that?
Well, definitely. We've seen a massive spike in challenges to our security systems. And I'm sure that working from home has added to the risks we face as a business, because people have been using maybe their own equipment, in ways that do not maintain the security circuit. And therefore, I think what we've been focused on is to make sure we've got secure VPN networks, we've got secure communication systems such as this. So we've been changing and investing in new ways of using technology in a way that's improved our security. So we have had to make changes during this time. We've stopped using various systems and said everybody must use. And interestingly, we've gone with Microsoft Teams. We're talking on Teams now. you know, we're trying to then enforce those new rules. You know, we must all use Teams.
Yeah.
We must all use our own Freshfields laptops. So we certainly have experienced those issues, and we're trying to both implement existing policies, but also to move quickly to try and ensure greater security. And again, I think clients are facing the same challenges. You know, many of our clients are working from home as well with security challenges. So having conversations with clients, particularly on very sensitive matters, and maybe agreeing a separate protocol for that sensitive matter. So I think there is this baseline of security that we need to try and ensure. But I think all of us need to be very alert to the fact that if we're working on a highly, highly sensitive matter, and many of us are in these difficult times, is there a different way that we should adopt because of the particular sensitivity of that matter? And I think that's the thing we all need to be maybe a bit more alert to.
Right, thank you. Zairi, you got some thoughts on this as well?
Yes. In Korea, I have not heard of any significant hacking of law firms yet, but I'm hearing that you know, the level of hacking attempts is increasing, and we are spending more on IT technology and security, which increases as you know, more people, including our clients, work from home. So IT, we have been investing heavily in IT from the beginning, and so I think we are better prepared than others in terms of you know, anti-hacking measures and things like that. But it is still you know, very important, and we are you know, making efforts to make sure that you know, our information is secure.
Okay, thank you. Now we are naturally, I think, moving on to looking ahead. So let me just quickly flash the next segment slides, you know, so that we can have, for the benefit of the participants, what we're going to go into. But actually, it's going to be a continuation of this conversation, the wonderful conversation that we've had. And the next segment was about exploring what the new normal is going to be. And you know, whether there is going to be a new normal, if what we're experiencing is temporary, and if there are changes that we have to adapt to, what do you anticipate those things to be? Okay, so there's some stuff here that I've put out, but I don't think we need any of this, because I think we are getting a lot already from ourselves, and I think what our participants will want to hear is your experience more than this theoretical articles from albeit you know, leading institutions. So on this score, I would like to continue on 2 points. We've talked about the IT part and the need to improve IT expenditure, really investments and so on, and to tighten its adaptation for working from anywhere, right? Not just from home, I guess. And I'll just explore this idea of working from home, which was touched on earlier. Now, as I was sharing with Zairi before this session began, yesterday we had a very good session with some GCs, and one of the GCs felt that working from home as a new normal, if I hope I didn't paraphrase him wrongly, but I think he's basically saying it's hype. Okay, while he says that it may open our perspective to allow for, you know, working from home, it should be viewed from a wider context, that really what we should enable, and this is where IT investments come in, right? We should enable working from anywhere, so that how on this point where the new normal may be heading is increased mobility, increasing the ourselves to be able to work productively from anywhere. Any thoughts on this? Stephen, you work from anywhere. Right now you're in, for example, a lovely place. What are your thoughts on this? And how do you see Freshfields or other law firms heading for this? Yeah, on this point.
Well, generally speaking, I'm not a believer in this concept of new normal. I totally agree with General Counsel, and again, the conversations I've had with General Counsel are expecting law firms as their service providers to get back to doing things normally for them. So I think we have a, we have a client expectation issue as well. What I do think, though, is that we're going to see this period as an accelerator of some trends that were already happening and emerging. So I think we will see more people working from home, and I think we will see a greater acceptance of that. But at the same time, we've got to put some, I believe, some parameters around that. Else we will start to lose, the things that make law firms very, in my view, very special places to work. The collegiality, the mentoring, the feeling of being part of something bigger will be destroyed if we all of a sudden never meet again and constantly work meet physically again and constantly work from home. So I think we will have to rethink home working. I think it will be more of a feature going forward, but I do think we will have to think about how we get people back into the office whilst permitting more flexibility. I think we will need to look at the tech that we're using. I think on balance, the tech has worked, but I think particularly the security challenges around home working and just the ease of it will need to be revisited. And again, that may be particularly focused on, do our people work in places where the Wi-Fi is good enough? And how do we get around that problem? So I think there's quite a bit of work to be done on the tech, and I think that will make us think about that. I think we need to think about our client lists.
Yeah.
What are our clients doing in this period? And I think, something we probably are all moving to in one way or another. Some firms think about it very clearly, others are kind of stumbling into it, but probably moving to a world where we have fewer but stronger client relationships. And using this period where our clients have particular challenges to try and identify the most important clients for us to be more, most focused on. Now, we need to look after all our clients, but, as we all know, some clients are more important than others. And I think, again, senior leadership in law firms have probably got to get more involved with that client relationship piece than some of them have. And I think that could be a change that we're going to see, that as law firm leadership thinks harder about the business, they think about how they can direct better relationships with certain clients. And then just finally, I think we need to get our litigation colleagues to think about the impact, the court closures had on litigation, the way our clients are now going through a risk-adverse phase. So should we be talking to them more about mediation? Should we be training ourselves more in mediation? Should we, dare I say it, persuade our litigators to use our corporate partners to help mediate because of their experience? So how can we adapt, particularly our litigation practice, to what I think is quite a changed world in terms of clients thinking about litigation? But I think all those things, to me, were things that either were beginning to happen or should have been beginning to happen. And we will see this period not as a new normal, but as an accelerator. So we will have a better normal rather than some sort of new world that is vastly different.
Interesting. Sairi, any thoughts on some of the points that,
Sure. Well, I think, first of all, I agree very much with what Stephen said. And in this situation, as we face the so-called the new normal, the basic approach should be foresight based on insight. In other words, we have to learn from the history in order to predict the future. and the pattern of human development tends to repeat itself. So we have to look back and what happened, particularly, for example, in my case, what happened during my professional career of 40 years. We started with facts, career and facts, and now we have emails and many other things, smartphones and so on. So if we look at what happened during our career of 40 years and predict from that point the next maybe 10 years or 20 years, I think the direction would be pretty clear, or at least predictable. So I agree that the increased mobility is a feature of the new normal, and it may also impact our lifestyle, or it actually comes from our changed lifestyle, client's lifestyle and our lawyer's lifestyle. And so the reality of the new normal is, in fact, expedited realization of the big trend triggered by the crisis. The big trend was going on, but it has been expedited by the crisis. And so we are forced to learn something that was going on, but we were reluctant to learn very fast. So, for example, in my personal experience, I started internet banking, which is commonplace among youngers, but I started now, and I started to buy grocery by e-commerce, and that is being expedited. So in a sense, it's nothing new, but surprisingly fast advent of a new world. That's, I think, the key feature of the new normal. And if we may cite a few specific examples, I received a Zoom meeting invitation from the chairman of a major Wall Street law firm for the first time in my career. I never received a Zoom meeting invite from the CEO of a law firm. And so I tried. It was a very interesting experience, and it developed into a series of Zoom meetings with his partners and our partners in various different practice areas. And I understand that we are doing the same thing with ZICO this week. So that's an interesting development, or a new normal, which would replace not only in-person meetings, but also perhaps telephone conference calls. In the past, we were happy with the telephone conference calls. If we are accustomed to Zoom meeting, why don't we do Zoom meeting rather than telephone conference call? So as emails replaced hard copy communications, Zoom meeting may replace both in-person meeting and conference calls. So these are, and another example is business travel. I don't know how our business travel pattern will change, but it will change. And we have to, devise some creative ideas to make it, to substitute it, but make it more effective and efficient. And also, more importantly, the business model is a new business model may be coming. And as I see the recent developments of companies like Amazon, Netflix, Uber, etc., I think the key feature of their new business model is an extreme integration of differentiation. In other words, we differentiate clients or customers' demands and then integrate them for business. So integration of differentiation may be the key feature of the new normal. And if we apply that concept to the legal profession and legal service industry, we see many different types of alternative legal service providers. And some law firms dedicate some of their practice to a certain area of legal service for a particular client for a year or so. And perhaps in the future, we may see a law firm dedicated to a particular client, exclusive outsourcing arrangement between the client and the law firm. In other words, a client may decide to outsource their whole legal department to a law firm, which a similar thing has happened with Siemens in Germany, maybe 10 or 20 years ago. But that's different because they developed into different direction. But in the future, we may see a lot more new business model, particularly to overcome the conflict issue, and at the same time maintain the scale and expertise of a big firm.
Yeah.
So I think the new normal would be basically something what has happening, but expedited by the crisis, and we have to find out based on the insight into the past and predict what's going to happen and be prepared. So foresight and creativity from the perspective of a client's demand and the firm's business objective would be the approach we have to take.
Thank you. Thank you, Zairi. I particularly can connect with your lovely soundbite, integration of differentiation. Our Mr. Chu Seng Kok will love that, because this is exactly what he has been trying to do, right? Differentiate your clients and basically better suit your type of legal services and the way you deliver it better according to their differentiated needs. But there's one topic that has flowed from what you have mentioned now, and I'm trying to marry this with a question of more general business development, client relationship. Now, we know we've got social distancing, we've got restrictions in travel. So I, for example, can't go to Korea, and I would love to go to where Stephen is right now, to visit you and have that face-to-face, communication, right? We are all humans. We need that social interaction, and I think Stephen touched on this as well as Zairi, about how important for us to have that physical connection in order to be able to have stronger bonds, right? Particularly with clients. So we have an organization, and through Hanim's initiatives, we've done webinars, and we see that. And now, as she has said, we're getting into webinar fatigue. But what are maybe some of the tips, observations, and advice you may give to all of us here in being able to remain and keep our bonds strong with clients despite these restrictions? Maybe just a minute each, because we are running short of time, and just a few more topics that I wanted to cover before we end off. Maybe Zairi? Yeah.
Perhaps I can give you a couple of examples. One example is an increasing use of a webinar and Zoom meeting. We have already experienced it, and we found that our clients are very receptive and responsive to such an approach. And the other one, which I am practicing for maybe a couple of years, is that with a particular general counsel of our client, I have been exchanging, chatting, social network, SNS, and I do that with him every day, maybe at least 10 times a day. So what I realized is that, and he also realized that, although we meet perhaps on a quarterly basis, it feels like we are meeting every day, because we are exchanging text messages every day, 10 times a day. And it's not necessarily a business-oriented topics, but sometimes I think it relates to business topics. So particularly in this time of social distancing, a frequent use of SNS may be a good way of keeping touch with a client, or even with your associate, and so on.
Yeah. Stephen?
Three quick comments from me. I think we're beginning to get to a point where there's webinar fatigue. Clearly not this one. We've got great participation, but generally speaking, I think I'm picking up that people are kind of getting fed up with yet another webinar, particularly, you know, on the same theme. So I think, and I saw the question from your colleague on business development. I think we've got to think differently, not just how many more webinars can we produce. And I think some of that may have to be very targeted webinars, maybe to an individual client, you know, with a topic that client's interested in. So maybe replacing some client training or some client visit that we might have done with some sort of special event webinar with maybe a social element as well. So I think we've got to stop just saying, you know, we've now got the technology, we can do a webinar. I think we've got to say, how can we best use the technology to have a special event with a client rather than just yet another webinar. And then I think my other point, and I agree completely with Sairi's point about communicating with clients, talking to clients. But I think one of the challenges for a law firm is making sure those conversations are shared and coordinated. So if I have a good conversation with a client that says something of interest to the 2 or 3 other partners that work for that same client, I should share it. Not only because it may trigger a business opportunity, but it will really impress the client that we are thinking about them as a team, as a group that can help them. And being able to find ways of sharing that information, I think has always been a challenge to law firms. You know, we're not good at writing meeting notes. We're not good at picking up the phone. I think we ought to just reflect on how do we better manage those client relationships by sharing that information. But based on, as Sairi says, more activity, more conversation with the client.
This leads me to one point, which I think has been, as Sairi put it, a trend. And I just wonder what your thoughts are and how law firms should deal with it. And this, Stephen, you also mentioned, which is that is there a trend where marketing by a law firm has become more individual driven, as in individual promoting that individual as a brand versus the organization? Where I'm coming from is, you know, for example, social media, right? When we sign on an account, of course, you've got a corporate account, but perhaps the real advantage of the corporate account is that you've got all your partners in it with their own separate individual accounts, let's say on LinkedIn, and which then allows the law firm to propagate or leverage on their own personal network to communicate personally with their clients. And because of the nature of social media, which is, you know, it's you, your phone, and the other person's phone, has it become important for us then to sell our individual partners alongside the corporate brand, more so or catalyzed by the pandemic, where we cannot do physical interactions through physical interactions through conferences and so on and so forth from now. Maybe Sairi or Stephen, you got some thoughts on this? You know, for example, both of you have very strong personal brands, but I'm talking about institutionalizing this as a branding strategy for the firm. Stephen?
Well, I'm probably a bit old-fashioned on this subject in the sense that I think it really, you know, if we're all going to be within a law firm, there has to be a purpose of that law firm. It has to be a collective activity rather than just a collection of individuals. So I strongly believe that client relationships need to be individually led. And I think, again, as a generalization, partners probably don't do enough work at building those relationships. But I think the obligation of that partner responsible for that relationship is to deliver the firm. So I would rather not talk about the brand of individuals. I would rather talk about the responsibility of individuals to help build the firm and to focus on the brand of the firm. I think once we start trying to build individual brands, as opposed to individual characters and responsibilities, then we're in danger of actually undermining the whole concept of a firm. And you've seen that happen in some US firms where, you know, basically a partner is at a firm, you know, for as long as he can build his book of business to then move to another firm. And that begins to break down the whole fabric and culture of the firm, both for the partners and for the associates. So I'm a strong believer in coming together within a firm for the collective good, but to having individual responsibility, but not individual brands.
Sairi, your thoughts on this? Yeah.
I completely agree with Stephen's view and approach. And I value that the institutional brand should be the first priority. And that's the challenge the law firm management faces now because of the increasing mobility of individual brands. You know, and that's also caused in large part by clients, because clients would like to take a particular partner or a particular group of people as their service provider in a particular area of law or in a particular industry, and therefore, you know, there is a force imposed on the individual lawyers and even on the firm from the clients. And so how can we overcome such a pressure and maintain the institutional brand and improve it? That's a real challenge. And in that respect, I think the new normal may be an area where you know, we have to really work hard. I think the increased mobility of partners may be the biggest challenge faced by U.S. law firms, and less so in other parts of the world, but still growing in other parts of the world as well.
Yeah. Okay. All right. We are at 2:02 p.m. You know, which is past the hour for us. That I've actually, you know, there are some more questions that have been put in the Q&A, and I've actually also received separately some questions from our more shy colleagues. But I know your time is precious, and I believe we've had a very, very meaningful conversation, lots to share. This certainly will not be our last. And I'm sure this theme will continue as our situation unfolds in the coming weeks, months, and maybe in the longer term. So on that note, I would like, on behalf of the ZICO Law Partnership, thank you both so very much for being able to spend time with us, especially during lunchtime, at least for us in this time zone, including Sairi and Stephen as well. Hopefully you have a good breakfast later. Hanim, would you like to share with us a few? Okay.
No, just say thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We will catch up with you again. In the meantime, have a great day, a great week in the coming months. Thank you very much.
Keep safe.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.